Hey y'all, it's Ryan Stellar. This is Sean.
How's it going?
Hey. This is another episode of This American Hustle, and today we're getting into a topic that I think is really fascinating, and it's how you're going to pay for college. Well, specifically one type of payment called an ISA, which is an income sharing agreement. It's kind of a new idea in that it's not very popular yet with many people. But we're going to share a little bit about the history. It goes back a few decades, and we're going to try and break down some of the pros and cons of when you should and shouldn't use this, and talk about some of the places where it is succeeding. So let's get into it. At the end, we'll try and give an opinion about when we think it's appropriate.
Yeah.
Also, I think the key is to give you some practical advice about when it's a good idea to utilize something like this. So let's just talk about what it is.
All right. Yeah, so essentially the best way that I see it described as, this is like how someone like a venture capitalist would essentially invest in a student or a person that's trying to go towards a higher education. And what that essentially means is that whether it's a bank, whether it's a specific company that only does ISAs, whoever is providing this funding is essentially paying for the person's education, and they essentially are paying nothing up front but pay all of it on the back end once they actually employed, and they get a percentage of their initial income taken by people that they were funded by originally.
Okay, so hold on a second. So I could go to college,
mm-hmm.
and I could pay out of pocket, right? So
Yes.
if I have the 20 to 50 grand a year, I could pay out of pocket.
Yeah.
That doesn't work for most people. So you typically take a loan.
Yep.
Sometimes they're from the federal government, sometimes they're from a bank.
Yep.
And they come at a percentage rate. And the reason they're difficult, and I think it's really hard for young people in particular, is the first 2, 3, 5 years of your career, if you're a millennial, maybe decades of your career,
Yeah.
feel like you're not really making a lot of, it's hard to make ends meet.
Yeah.
So having to pay, a constant $400 every month
Yeah.
is burdensome, particularly in the beginning.
Yes.
Later on, your career might not be a lot of money. So that's where this comes in.
Yeah.
Right. So instead of paying the constant $400 a month, which if I'm making, $36,000 a year, so if I'm making $3,000 a month, that my loan is $400. That's more than 10% of my income.
Exactly.
Right. That's a lot.
It's a lot.
So how does this differ then?
All right. So the way it essentially works is that it works in a way that it's depending on the program that's set up. Some do it on a monthly basis, some do it on an annual basis. So you could be doing the ISA agreement where you pay 4 to 5%. I think the percentages can range from anywhere from like 3 to like maybe sometimes 8, 10% of your income. But that's on an annual basis. And that's something that you can and it allows you to do a lot more forecasting and planning so that you can budget it much better rather than having to worry about that funding every single month. If you do, but you could also do it in a monthly fashion too.
Mm-hmm.
So it allows you to kind of adjust for how much money you're making on a monthly or an annual basis, and it isn't set numbers that you're going to be paying, and increase even sometimes with interest like it would if it was a loan.
Okay, so and that percentage is based on the college funding that you looked at?
I think so. I think the one of them that I looked at was specifically about college funding and how I think they used a specific story of some girl that went to Purdue University, and she paid like 4 point something percent of her income.
Okay.
Her first, and the thing is that this isn't the kind of thing that extends like a person's entire career.
Okay.
Which is one thing that I think is also really important to address when you talk about it, is because a lot of the critics of it are like, oh, how is this different than like indentured servitude? You're going to be paying money to these people every single year until you die.
Right.
How's it any better than a loan? But in reality, a lot of these programs are set up so that you could sometimes, depending on it, you could pay it back in as few as like a couple years, and some cap off it like you don't pay after 10 years.
Okay. So I want to make a couple points. So the first one is, this is it's like a loan in that you're getting access to money now
Mm-hmm.
to buy an education. and you're paying it off over a period of time. It doesn't have to only be used for education. It's a general sort of financial tool to put off costs, right? Mm-hmm. The most common place it's coming up, though, is education.
Yes.
And that's the example we're definitely going to focus on, and we are focusing on. And we're going to talk about it in two different ways. So the most common experience people have is with universities, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what Sean's getting into. But the other one we're going to talk about are these skills-based boot camps that are like popping up all over the world, right? So I'm personally familiar with mostly with software engineering boot camps. There's like 200 of them across the world right now, right? So there's a lot. It's becoming very, very popular, and they have a very, progressive approach to
pretty widespread success too.
Yeah, to a lot of things. So they have taken to this. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about a lot of numbers. So basically, I just want to frame the discussion. We're going to talk about a lot of numbers, and your particular deal, if you look into one of these ISAs, is going to vary a lot. Like, we are not licensed financial advisors, and the specifics of your deal will make it a good deal or a bad deal. So it's like getting a credit card or any other loan. Like, you have to read the fine print. You should talk to somebody who is a professional that understands accounting and finance and can advise you on whether or not it's an appropriate choice for you. So we're gonna talk about things in the next 20 minutes or so, but it's going to be mostly to talk about the idea of ISAs, and the specifics of what you should or shouldn't do depends on your situation.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just want to make that real clear. So what is okay, so the benefit basically is the constant percentage of payback.
Yes.
Right? Rather than Bank of America is going to knock on your door every month and say, give me $400.
Yeah.
They're going to knock on your door and say, give me 5% of your check.
Yeah.
Right? So when you're scraping by first out of college, I think the average starting salary out of college is like $36,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
So when you're scraping by, that 5% is about $1,800 a year or something like that, right? So $1,800 a year is a lot less than $400 a month. Mm-hmm. So it benefits you in the beginning when your career is just getting started, and that's the whole idea. Is it's more fair. It takes more fair cut of your pay as time goes on.
Exactly.
Right, and then hopefully, like, you get over a certain point where you're making much more than average, and then that 5% should become a lot better than maybe what they would get with the loan.
Exactly. And the thing is that whatever money that the person who invested in you paid, a lot of times these deals cut off, depending on how you do it. If it takes you longer to actually accrue the funds that essentially that makes back the investment the person put, or the bank or whoever put the money down for you, if they make that back quicker, then it benefits the person who invested, because they get to start accruing money off of the investment that they originally made. So it's a marketplace that essentially has allowed people to kind of invest in people that they believe are going to be successful.
Yep.
And it also kind of helps out these people, even though it might be it could actually probably be annoying for a lot of people, and I can see how that would be frustrating, especially if you are launching really successfully your first 5 years out of school, and next thing you know, you're going to be making six figures before most people would even be approaching that number much earlier, and you'd be losing a lot of that money that you probably would be paying a fraction of if you kept the same college loan.
Right.
So it's a trade-off. It's one of these things where if you are not, if you're confident that you're going to be able to get there at some point to the successful level where you'll be making a decent amount of money, then that would be something. Then ISA is something to look into, because if you're a little nervous at the outset, like, oh, I don't know how it's going to be my first couple of years of school, how much money I'm going to be making. It would be nice to have a nice security, and that I wouldn't be paying so much money that I'd be overloading myself, and I wouldn't have access to the resources that I need.
Right.
But then the other side of it is that if you right out of school start making a ton of money, you're going to be essentially making these people that invested in you money, and you're going to be paying more than what you were actually given.
Right.
So it's one of these things where you have to really overanalyze it. And if you need an ISA, then it's something you should go into. But if you're someone that's like next level confident, you're like, I know, like 3 years out of school I'm going to be making six figures, no problem, then it's probably not for you. I'm going to be pretty honest, it's probably not for you. Yeah. But I think it comes to a point where it takes a lot of kind of self-awareness of where you're at in your career path that you'd be able to make that kind of decision.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think it comes across as a new idea in a lot of ways because I think I'm a little older than Sean, and a lot of my friends had struggled a lot in 2008 when there was the Great Recession, right? And some economists would actually say, and hedge fund people and financial analysts would say, we never actually got out of that recession. We just restructured the way jobs work. So that's kind of like a very deep topic. But certainly there's a lot of people in America that feel like they're still struggling financially.
Yeah.
So I first became aware of ISAs, just to give you a sense of the history of this idea. I first became aware of them about a decade ago as the recession was hitting and a lot of millennials were struggling financially. They felt like they were completely unemployed. So like if you have a $400 loan and you have no job, that $400 is a ton of money per month, right? So that was where a lot of this came from, is inconsistent unemployment for young people after college, but also having to pay up for these loans after college. But it's actually an older idea than that, right? So it goes back to the 50s, so Milton Friedman. So anybody who's ever taken an economics class knows about Milton Friedman. Very famous conservative economist, right?
Well, it depends. So like most people classify him actually more libertarian in the sense that he approaches things in equity based, and that people who get what they deserve is kind of what his approach is. And I think that's kind of why he was such a strong proponent of something like an ISA.
Okay.
And that it doesn't immediately disable people who are unable to pay up front.
Right.
But it gives people an opportunity who have the confidence to kind of regain that own investment in themselves and kind of like move forward. So that's why it kind of makes sense in that sense.
Yeah. The only reason I pointed out though is he's a controversial name.
He's incredibly controversial.
Yeah, and I don't want to go off and say that Brian told you to like Milton Friedman's like a genius, because a lot of people don't like him.
Yeah.
But because he can be, depending on your perspective, he can be kind of harsh.
Exactly.
But I think he's also a proponent of the negative income tax, which a lot of people don't realize. Which, if you make less than the poverty line, instead of you paying taxes, the government would pay you back a tax. Yeah. Which is a very interesting idea that he doesn't get a lot of
people are very against. It makes sense. And that's also kind of like he's a very ambiguous figure in that sense. Is that there's some things that wouldn't really make sense to according to some of the other things that he's said in the past, which is why he's controversial. So
right. So anyway, I just want to let you know that the idea goes back a long time. Right. Because this is this fundamental question of like, should somebody have to pay back $400 when they're so young and they don't have the income that they're going to have later in life? And it progressed. So in 1970, they actually did an experiment. So Yale did an experiment where they had like a cohort. I don't know how many people it was. Let's say it's hundreds of students opt into this program, and it actually ended rather poorly. So they found a lot of people either could not pay back or refused to pay back. And it was they did a modification where they said, okay, there's 100 students, so we took 100 students times tuition, so that total amount, and then the class had to pay back the total amount. So it was a different scenario than most of the ISAs you're going to run into if you ever hear about this experiment, because basically more financially successful classmates had to cover less financially, and it became very unpopular. And then I didn't hear much about it between the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s until the recession. And now it's becoming very popular because Silicon Valley discovered it, basically. And Silicon Valley is looking at it from this sort of tech angle of like, how can we disrupt traditional loan providers? How can we disrupt higher education to make it more equitable and better deal for people? And that's some of the stuff we wanted to share with you also. So like we said, the ISA may or may not make sense for your financial situation, but if it does make sense, particularly if you're going to go into a career where you have a high likelihood of getting a good salary, it makes sense for basically the institutions to give it. So I'm getting a little confused here. But basically, let's take an example. So Purdue University. Purdue is a large university in Indiana, right? Yes. Yeah. And famous for engineering primarily, but a good school overall. And they introduced an ISA program that some students started opting into, and that was the example Sean brought up earlier.
Yeah.
And that's an example where a traditional institution, a school that costs $200,000 to get an undergraduate education is experimenting with this now, kind of like Yale did in the 70s, to figure out if it works for students. I don't know. Did you find any student experience, like blogs or anything on that?
Yeah. So the thing is that it's also, I want to make it very clear that Purdue University doesn't really, they push this idea of an ISA, but they don't. It's not like it's a requirement. Which is something that's important for people to realize, is that there are always going to be people that can pay completely upfront for school, or they'd be willing to have a loan that they could have somehow paid back by their family or something. So and either way, it would work out in a way that it's not a requirement. But the thing is that a lot of people who have used this model have kind of seen it as really strong backing and security, where they're able to really feel like the school that they're at or whatever education they're receiving is directly tied and incentivized for them to succeed, which I feel like is another philosophical discussion to have when it comes to like the how higher education works, in the sense that if a school is personally invested in each student's success, then that in and of itself adds value for the student. And an ISA is kind of a way for a school to take that responsibility up.
Right.
They're taking responsibility for the student's success, and if that student doesn't succeed, then it's the school that gets the worst results from it, not the student.
Right.
So in that way, it aligns goals better than a lot of the models are now today, because of how expensive schools are, and that maybe the school might not be as committed after someone graduates to like get them a job or get them on the right path so that they are making money.
Right. So that example is counter to what happens to everybody else in college, right? Yeah. So beginning of the semester, you sign up for classes. They start sending you bills in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
If you don't pay them by the end of the semester, they're going to put you in a default and have a credit agency come after you or whatever.
Yep.
Oh, come on, camera. And we're focusing. What's going on?
What happened here?
That's good. Let's give it a tap. Okay.
There we go.
So you got to pay them. You got to get money right away. So what do you typically do? Call up Citibank. Maybe if you have access to federal loans, through FAFSA, you line them up. You cut a check to the institution, and they don't care. They're done with you, right, for that semester.
Yeah.
And they don't care what happens, right? So you just paid, $15,000, $20,000 per semester, $25,000 a semester, and then they no longer care about your success. Now Citibank does, right? They're gonna hound you and ruin your credit if you don't pay them back.
Yeah.
But the college can cash that check and pay their professors and move on with life.
Yeah.
So in the Purdue example, they are going to collect money from you every month that you pay this 5% for whatever the term is, and the term can change. So it's like any loan. It can be for a year, 5 years, 30 years, right? A mortgage is 30 years. It's just a loan. That's very long. And I think what are most education loans written at? Is it 10-year term, 10-year payback?
I actually don't really know.
I'm not sure either.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the actual length is.
I think the initial ones are 10 or 15 years, and then most people bundle them together and then refinance.
Yeah.
But in this case, with the Purdue example, they're gonna get a 5% of your income every year for, let's say it's 10 years, right?
Yeah.
So from 22 years old to 32 years old, they really hope that you make more money per year.
Yeah.
Right? And the idea is, because they're on the hook for how you do when you're 25, 27, and 32, they're going to do a better job of educating you in the present.
Yeah.
Right? Alternatively, they might do a better job of controlling their costs in the present, which is a different kind of a different discussion. But yeah.
Another perspective you can look at is that they would also be kind of invested post graduation as well, and that they could establish really strong alumni networks that would essentially allow people to increase the value that they would be getting out of their postgraduate experience,
Right.
which is some initiatives that a lot of schools have taken. Like I know that at my school, Gettysburg College, is really focused on the alumni network, considering how small of a school we are. But our active alumni network is considered one of the best in the country because of how much the school is invested in and kind of funneling these people to good positions where they're able to meet up with the right people and get them on the right track to success.
Right.
So in that way, it makes sense that makes sense. Like that is intuitive with the model of what an ISA would be.
Right.
My school doesn't offer ISAs. At least I'm not aware of them ever using them.
Yeah.
But I think it's one of those things where either way, if the school has vested interest in a student's success, that's beneficial to both.
Yeah.
I feel like, and I think that's an important characteristic of an ISA that I think is definitely one of the biggest and strongest pros of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit. So that's great. Purdue is doing. It's definitely, as we were Googling this stuff, it was definitely the most common example of a university that's doing this right now.
Yeah.
And I want to switch gears and talk about new forms of education.
Mm-hmm.
So my specialty that I have a specialty experience with are what's known as skills-based boot camps or career accelerators, or in the specific case, software engineering boot camps, right? So within software, one of the earliest ones was called Dev Boot Camp back in 2012. Then came ones like Hack Reactor, App Academy, and now there are close to 200 of them globally. Mm-hmm. Some of them are very successful, some are not particularly successful.
Yeah.
But the ones that were successful inspired other people to take the model and make it broader, right? So the way these boot camps work is you're essentially getting a career establishing education in 3 months. That's a big deal, right? So within software, you used to get 4 years of a computer science degree, maybe some internships or something. You would come out and then you would get your first job after 4 years and paying $200,000, and then you would start your career as a software engineer. Hack Reactor Dev Bootcamp said, we can do that. We can give you 3 months of education. We're going to charge you $12,000, $15,000, maybe $20,000. But you'll come out making, and this is in San Francisco, $110,000 a year. Mm-hmm. So for 3 months of education, you can make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I saw this happen when I worked at Hack Reactor, where people, we had a small number of people either drop out of college because they felt like college was a bad deal financially for them, or 1 or 2 people who came directly from high school. Yeah. They learned about the school and were like, forget traditional college, I'm going right here. 17 grand cash. It's less than 1 semester at a private school, and they were done, and they had a job. And I know some of those people are great, and 1 or 2 of them work at very big name companies. So it's an amazing return on investment. Yeah. So that experience has influenced other people, and that's one of the things I want to talk about. So there's a school called Mission U. It's run by a very famous guy named Adam Braun, and a friend of mine who is less famous but still incredibly talented. And they have a career establishing. What's different about them than Hack Reactor or software boot camps is a lot of the software boot camps are meant for people who are changing careers, they're 25 or 30 years old and they want to get into software. Mission U is really truly trying to be a replacement for a university. Yeah. And they run strictly on an ISA model. So they don't ask, I don't think they even have an option for you to pay them in cash. Yeah. And they do, in order to ensure they get results, they focus on extremely high value, reliable growth careers, which is one of the general themes about This American Hustle is how do you make money? Growth careers, technology, whatever it's going to be, is an important thing to consider. So that they've done that, and basically they provide no upfront, a model where an 18-year-old can come to them, and it's a much longer program. It's a year, so it's a combination of theoretical experience, classroom experience, and applied experience like internships and that sort of thing. But over a year, you get a career establishing education. You pay no money up front, and then they take the risk on the back end, like we were talking about Purdue doing. I'm not sure what the terms are. I'd say it's 5% a year. Yeah. So that is one of the first examples I've seen where the business has gone full into this model, aggressively tried to create a win-win for students who are facing, very, very challenging times, and with the modern economy and how difficult it is. And they're really being the partner with the students and using this financial instrument as a way to do it.
Yeah.
They're brand new. I have no idea if it's going to work out. It's incredibly risky, but it's a phenomenal mission. It's very cool.
Yeah.
And that's an example of where it's breaking out. So this happens a lot in technology, where you have these very narrow products that solve a very narrow problem, like a software engineering boot camp for people who want to switch careers, and then the success there provides lessons that can be broadened. So use of the ISAs there gets broadened and is being applied to what is a direct competitor for traditional universities, which is really, really cool. Now, you can do an ISA without going to a university or without going to Mission U or a boot camp, and there's just financial institutions that provide them. So one of them is called Upstart, the other one is called Pave, and the third one is called Lumni, Lumni. So I'll put the links below in the video. But I know people who've used Upstart to start companies. Mm-hmm. So the way Upstart works, I'm most familiar with them, is if you come from a particular institution, it's a little bit elitist, honestly. You have to go to pretty fancy schools to qualify. But alumni from those institutions, so it's circling back to this holistic integration of alumni and long-term, short-term. Yeah. But alumni put money into a pot with Upstart, and then that money gets invested in new graduates from those elite institutions. So I've seen it very commonly. I know a guy who started a company out of Stanford. Yeah. And I assume he probably had loans from, he went to business school there, so he probably had $150,000 in loans or something like that. But he wanted to start a startup, and he used Upstart to do it. Mm-hmm. And it's the payback terms are this ISA situation. So anyway, so ISAs have been around a while. They can be used for virtually anything. The most common place they're talked about as a replacement for traditional college loans. Yeah. And they may or may not be a good fit for that based on what we've learned from the Yale experiment in the 1970s and what Purdue is doing now. Yes. But it seems like for maybe more focused vocational skills-based schools like boot camps and Mission U,
it seems to work really well.
It might be a better fit, right? And I think that's the summary here. Is it's a complex choice. You have to approach it with a lot of financial analysis and getting advice, probably from an accountant and somebody who understands financial modeling, and understand if it's right for you versus a traditional loan, and know that basically that the option it exists and it's becoming more prevalent. Mm-hmm. So as more companies provide it and more schools like Mission U and others try and experiment with it, we'll understand when it's a good use for, and hopefully become, if it works for people, it becomes more popular.
Exactly.
But if it ends up feeling like a bad deal, then maybe it should go away as an idea.
Yeah, but as of right now, it's just a large-scale kind of case study, and we'll have to see how it develops in the next couple of years. And I think, like you said, it's a instance per instance kind of thing, where if it could work for someone, it couldn't work for another person. So we'll have to wait and see. But otherwise, it's really interesting, and I think it's something that everyone should try and look into. And whether it's right for you, whether it's not, is completely up to you. So just take a look.
All right. Thanks.
This is This American Hustle signing out. Have a good one.